Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network. My name is Jeff Bradbury. Thank you so much for joining us today and making TeacherCast your home for professional development. This is Educational Podcasting Today, episode 24. Today, we're going to be talking to the crew from the Gonna Geek Network all about podcasting, broadcasting, and then at the end of the show, we're going to get a little nerdy. We're going to be talking about things like Star Wars and Transformers. If you're into nerd and geek culture, stick around. Before we get into our episode, I want to remind you there's some great things happening these days over on TeacherCast. Talking about podcasting and blogging, we just released a great post all about editorial calendars. What is an editorial calendar? An editorial calendar is an organizational application, if you will, that really helps you create a lengthy content drip. For instance, you might say that January is going to be STEM month on your show, and maybe February is podcasting month. An editorial calendar is really sitting there designed to help you get your thoughts organized and help you write the content that's going to help you and your network, whether it be a website or podcast, grow to its fullest potential. You can go over to teachercast.net and check out our brand new episode today on editorial calendars. When you do, we have a free download for you. Check it out, a free download, a Google Sheet that has our editorial calendar. I'm actually opening our doors and letting you guys check out how we keep everything organized here on TeacherCast. So check out our brand new post on editorial calendars. I'll also have it here in our show notes under Educational Podcasting Today, episode number 24. As the year gets hotter and the weather gets warmer outside, I hope you guys are having a good time. We are just around the corner from the ISTE conference out in Chicago, Illinois. I'm looking forward to seeing 20,000 of our closest friends all getting together for one amazing conference. Of course, we're going to be out there. It's going to be our 6th conference. I'm looking forward to it. We're going to be working at the Microsoft booth. We're going to be working at the Wii Video booth. And we're even going to be doing some work with Google out there. We're having a great time. Look for us. We're going to be podcasting. We're going to be broadcasting. And I hope to see you guys. You can, of course, follow us over on TeacherCast to keep the latest and greatest. And we're going to be using our hashtag ISTE2018. Check it out. The ISTE conference is going to be coming up. For more information on what we've been doing at the ISTE conference, you can go to teachercast.net/ISTE. That's teachercast.net/ISTE. Now, I want to get into our main interview today with the guys from the Gonna Geek Network. I've been listening to this show for a while now. They are two guys that have an amazing network. If you're out there looking for anything in pop culture, from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to podcasting to you name it, they've got a lot of great stuff over there. You can check them out over at gonnageek.com. I want to bring on SP, Stargate Pioneer, and Stephen Jondrew. Stephen, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Well, thank you for having us on. I'm doing great today, especially because I'm on here.
It's so nice to meet you guys. Stephen, Stargate, tell us a little bit about your show and tell us a little bit about the Gonna Geek Network.
Which show? I mean, I do so many, actually.
Stuff over there, right?
Yeah, right. So the main show that we do that probably is appropriate for here is Better Podcasting, which is a podcast for the hobby podcaster. We try to teach people how to do things right with the minimal gear setup, that sort of thing. We don't necessarily touch on monetizing because we're just in it to have fun. And so if you are just getting into podcasting, you're thinking about doing it, Better Podcasting is definitely a great place to start. The first 6 episodes we did for people that are looking to start a podcast, no matter what kind of podcast you're doing. So go ahead and check those out. So that's pretty good. We also do a weekly podcast on general tech, geeky stuff. I do space news on that, and Stephen produces that. Actually, Stephen produces both of them, and that's called Gonna Geek, or the Gonna Geek Show. What are we calling it these days, Stephen?
We're calling it the Gonna Geek Show, starring Stephen Jondrew with some guests. No, it's just the GonnaGeek.com show. That's all it's called.
It's a really long hashtag there.
And I also do a couple of shows, one on the Marvel side of things and one on the DC side of things. The Marvel side of things is called Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., predominantly on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but we do everything. We just did a great show on the Avengers Infinity War and Deadpool 2. We did both of those. And then over on the DC side of the things, it's called Starling Tribune. It's predominantly on the DC TV show Arrow, which I'm guessing is heading into its last season, but we'll see about that. But we do review some of those great award-winning DCEU movies too.
And of course, we're going to be talking all things geek, all things movies. We got some great topics coming up. Stick around for the show. Of course, there's great ways that you can reach out and connect to the show. If you're interested in learning more about podcasting or creating your own podcast, you can go over to educationalpodcasting.today, where we have hundreds of blog posts and podcasts, all on the topic, great screencasts. We just released a 3-part video series on how to do Wirecast. So if anybody out there is looking for information on how you do broadcasting, live video, check that stuff out over at educationalpodcasting.today. Now, before we get to some of the geekier things here, a couple of questions came up. I was at a conference yesterday, and I did a 2-hour educational podcasting workshop where we had people in the audience, I keep saying in the audience, but in the class, that were podcasters, teachers looking to podcast, interested in learning statistics about podcast. And we were trying to actually wrestle with this question. And I always like bringing it up to at the beginning of these shows. What is the definition of a podcast? If you actually were looking at somebody that's never actually heard of the medium, how do you guys define the term podcast?
A miserable little pile of secrets.
So I always pitch it to people as radio through the internet. It's sort of the loose term. From a technical perspective, I think there's some other side of things that differentiate podcasting. Like you got to get it through an RSS feed, technically speaking. But for a consumer, I would just say that it's radio through the internet that's downloaded, of course, to your device.
And what do you think, Stargate?
Yeah, so the RSS is probably the key factor in what is it called for a podcast, because you're talking about time-delayed content. It's content that's available anytime. It's like on-demand radio almost. And RSS stands for Rich Site Summary. A lot of people call it the really simple syndication. A lot of people use RSS feed to get their news every day on their website, through Feedly or whatever your RSS reader is. But a podcast catcher is delivered through an RSS feed. And I would think that that would be the determining factor between like a YouTube channel or just an audio file put on the internet versus a podcast. So that's really what a podcast is an audio. It could be video, but it's predominantly audio file that's distributed through an RSS feed.
And that generally is the definition that we talk about when it comes, and I always, when I do these workshops, I always break it down between educational podcasting and professional podcasting, meaning in the classroom, out of the classroom. And I always say, when we're talking about, professional style podcasting, you're right. RSS feed, audio file, sometimes video, but not always. Mm-hmm. Whereas on the flip side, classroom teachers, when they say the word podcast, really just mean, I want to learn how to use audio. I want to learn how to make a video with my kids. And that could be anything from screencasting to taking out your phone and making a video and popping it up somewhere or anything like that. There's a lot of different variations on this. So we're going to talk today a little bit about podcasting from both of those worlds. If you have your own show, we're going to talk about equipment. If you're in the classroom, we're going to talk a little bit about equipment that you can use, maybe that isn't so pricey. So we're going to kind of jump all over the place here. But I think the first question that people usually ask is, and I'm going to ask Stargate this question here because I think you've got a good answer. Should I create a podcast?
Should you? Well, SP's golden rule of hobby podcasting number 2 is don't do more than 2 shows a week. So just keep that in mind. But should you create a podcast? Absolutely. You should create a podcast if you're passionate about something, that's when you need to create a podcast because you have something to share with the rest of the world. Even though if there's dozens of other podcasts in your niche talking about the same topic, I guarantee you will come at it from your own point of view, and there will be people that will relate to you. I was just looking at a bunch of Star Wars podcasts because I was like, I do listen to one particular Star Wars podcast on a continual basis, and I will continue doing that. But I'm like, I would like to look at some more. And I listened to like 6. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I cannot get into any of these yet. And I know I'll find another one because there's hundreds of Star Wars podcasts out there. But I haven't found one yet that I want to listen to on a weekly basis in addition to the one I already do. So that is your cue to start your podcast because there will be people that relate specifically to you. And if it's a topic that you have a passion about, then that is what you should start your podcast on. And that is really, Stephen, right? The first thing that we always talk about podcasting, make sure you have a topic, make sure you know what your content's going to be, right?
Absolutely. And the reason why we always say that passion should inspire your topic is because of the fact that you are not just generally talking about this thing once and then you're getting over it, moving on. Generally, there's a theme to your podcast and there should be a genre, which means you have to be able to create content on a per episode basis. So it's got to be something that you're passionate enough that you don't get bored in 3 weeks' time.
I couldn't agree with you more. And, TeacherCast has grown from one single show to now we've got like 9 feeds on iTunes, and we've got shows for podcasting, and we've got shows for technology coaches and for ed tech people. And you bring up a good topic here, which is there an unofficial rule that says after X number of new podcasts that you decide to create, when do you actually have to ask your spouse's permission to create that next show?
I say from the beginning, personally.
Yeah. No, I just say wait till your spouse goes to bed and just do it.
So I shouldn't tell my wife that I'm up to 9 different feeds on iTunes or anything like that.
It depends. It depends on if they can pay for themselves. I mean,
it's interesting you mentioned the spouse support thing. That's actually something that SP and I have talked about. We both have very supportive spouses, and we think that it's important to have supportive just family around you. It depends on your situation. Sometimes it's just a spouse. Sometimes you might have kids, and I think that that's a very important aspect of podcasting because it takes time. Even if you just have one show, to record it, to edit it, to put it out there, especially when you're starting off, takes off time. So you got to have that support around you. If maybe you're just by yourself, it's a lot easier, but definitely a supportive family makes a big difference.
I love doing these shows now. My kids are now 4.5 years old. By the way, I have 4.5-year-old triplets, and they love coming into the studio now, putting on the earphones and saying, "Daddy, can I do cheese?" And what that means is she wants to talk on the microphone and smile at herself in the camera here. And it's so awesome, right? So it's you're bringing up, it's for me, it's like a family bonding thing, like working with the kids. They see Daddy in the studio. They do these things. I have my other kid, he comes in and goes, "Daddy, can I do testing?" Because as they're sleeping, that's all they hear me say is testing 1, 2, 3 as I'm starting things out. So anybody that's starting off their show, as you said, have that content, right? Now, we're going to talk a little bit about organizing content and stuff as we go through here. But the question always comes up is, well, how much equipment do I need? I'm of the belief that if you're starting out, basic microphone, $50, you don't need to have a studio full of stuff. And especially if you're a classroom teacher, like, I usually recommend a snowball mic or something like that, $60, something like that, just for your class. But what are your guys' thoughts on equipment? And maybe if you guys can throw a recommendation out there.
Well, I'll start off and say that I think that if someone's thinking about getting into a podcast with a group of other people, I actually think you should wait buying equipment. I think what you should do is, like in a teacher scenario, you should go and you should get a bunch of the people who are interested together and take your phone, throw it in the middle of your circle if you have these people, and do a mock podcast. It's never going to ever be released, but at least you can listen back to that and go, is this interesting to somebody who's not involved with this conversation? Because you might just go get all these people together, think we're going to have the best podcast ever. And you go and you do a mock session, you listen back and you say, that would not be interesting at all to anybody that's not sitting in this room right now. So before you even invest in the equipment, give it just a try, go through a dry run and see, is this something that I want to invest money in? If you say yes, then for most people, our go-to recommendation is the Audio-Technica AT2005 microphone or the Audio-Technica ATR 2100. They're both very similar microphones, and they're pretty affordable.
And I completely echo that one. I'm sitting here on this. I've got 4 of them. It's my travel mic. It's what I use. They're nice because they are USB. I think you can plug them into an iPad, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you've got the connection in there.
I travel with an AT2005, and I really push the limits of it. But what's nice about it is that you can use XLR as well as USB at the same time. So when I'm recording, I actually use the XLR to run to a hardware recorder that I'm then getting a quality track from. And then I use the USB just to go into my laptop and then connect through Skype or whatever I'm doing to connect to my remote people. So it's nice. It's essentially a split right within the microphone, which is phenomenal for on-the-road travel.
I've never thought of using both connections at the same time.
Yeah, it's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, we do it all the time on the road.
Really? That is cool. I will have to try that. We've got the ISTE conference coming up, which is the country's largest educational technology festival. Like 20,000 educators are coming, and I always bring my booth and stuff like that. I will definitely try that because that's probably going to save me some packing on all of that stuff.
Yeah. So if you're a mobile podcaster on the road or getting interviews back and forth or moving your studio from classroom to classroom, that's probably pretty good. The USB is really good for connecting over the internet or for a backup. And I also have Zoom H5, which is a portable digital recorder that you can plug in via XLR as well as the USB. So that's really good. And the USB, like you said, can go into mobile devices. I've used mine into an Android phone before. I've used it into my iPhone and iPad before. And that all works great. Now, I know you didn't know this, but my daughter is actually graduating in December to be an elementary education teacher. So just this past semester, she was doing her student teaching and she had to do an in-class video for a science project. So what she did is she took her iPhone, she took some video with that. We have a 1080 camcorder, really cheap 1080 camcorder that she went in, took that so she could get a couple of shots. I told her some quick video stuff. She took that. She did not take any microphones. She just used the microphone that was in the camcorder or the iPhone. I did end up in post-production helping her use noise reduction and anti-deverb, basically. I was going to say anti-reverb, but deverb in there. And it turned out to be a great little video project. I know Stephen saw it as well. So using the stuff that you have at hand is great. Now, if I was going to do an actual podcast with older kids, like with high school age kids or something like that, maybe even college, what I would do is to start out with, I would get the Behringer XM 1800S, a couple 3-packs of that, and I would consider investing into a Zoom H6 with the external capsule on top that you could add a couple of XLRs. And that way you could have 6 different individuals or groups of people that were actually recorded into dynamic microphones. So that would be my cheap setup for like an older real style, what we would call a professional podcast. That's how I would go ahead and do it. And you would get some great audio through that, at least better audio than you would through a Snowball. Now, if that's all you got, you got $50 for a Snowball, go for that. But I think if you're going to do that, like a cell phone recording, the microphone on the iPhone or most Android phones is probably going to be good enough to do what you need to do. And if you want to expand from that, then go ahead and invest in some more professional style gear.
My suggestion for anybody out there that's trying to do this on a budget is buy the colored microphones. I think if you buy the purple or the pink versions of the Snowball and the Yeti, they're about $20 cheaper for some reason.
As long as they're sparkly.
Absolutely. And I totally agree. Like, and I say this to new podcast, like do episode 0. Do episode 0 part 2. Do episode 0 part 3. Mm-hmm. Figure out how your equipment works. Figure out how you're going to do these different shows. Put things together. I know a lot of people just want to put that first episode out right away. And I'm like, just figure out what you're doing first before you go public with things.
Absolutely.
I usually say, why are you doing this? Who are you? And what do you hope your audience gets from your show? That's episode 1. Like that's always the first hi. This is my introduction to doing all of this stuff. The problem with podcasting, I find, is that you never really know how to find a show unless you go and search for it, which brings us up to websites. I'm a WordPress guy. I've been using WordPress now for 7 years on TeacherCast. I couldn't imagine doing a show without it. Your thoughts on websites?
I'm also a WordPress person myself. I like WordPress. With that said, I also grew up more in the website of things before I got into podcasting. So I'm a little bit more familiar with that. So while I am a person that really advocates some benefits to having your own dedicated website, I also am very quickly to recommend people just stay with their podcast provider. So if you're going to do a podcast, you got to find a way to host that audio file somewhere. A lot of the big players that people sign up for, like Libsyn and Podbean, they will give you the option of having a fairly basic website. And I think for somebody who's starting out, that might be the better way to go because there's no back end maintenance that you're doing with WordPress. There's only one place that you're maintaining, and it's a lot simpler to set up and get going. So that's one of the reasons why, even though I am a big advocate of WordPress, I am often very quick to say, just start with your provider. But what I always tell people to do, though, is to get a domain, a .com, a .ca, whatever it is. See, I had to throw .ca in there since I'm Canadian, right? But get one of those, just so that what you can do is have one central location that you can always direct people to, that if you end up switching and eventually you get a WordPress backend, you can redirect that over there so everybody knows. Like with us, it's gonnageek.com. It doesn't matter where gonnageek.com goes. Everybody will always end up to where we're at because we say go to gonnageek.com.
Yeah, we've been using WordPress, like I said, for 7 years with all of this stuff. Last about, I guess it's been 8 or 9 months ago, we switched from our old hosting company over to podcast websites. And it's been, they're fantastic out there, podcast websites. We're all WordPress based, and they give you website and audio hosting and I'm saving myself hundreds of dollars a month.
That's awesome.
Stuff like that. Yeah. I don't remember exactly. I think my plan's like $80 a month or something like that. But that literally, like, I was paying $55 for Libsyn plus Bluehost plus Sakuri for my security plus.
Yeah.
All of that cash is I'm not spending any of that money, and podcast websites is awesome. teachercast.net/PW for more information on all of that stuff. Where are you guys? Plug your own stuff here. Like, where are you guys hosted? Where do you guys recommend out there?
I put all my shows on my MySpace page.
Really?
No. What I do
is that myspace.aol.com?
Yeah, that's right. .net.
Oh, yeah.
.org. So I was very lucky from the beginning. First of all, my co-host, who had been podcasting since 2006, recommended that I go with Libsyn, which was great because I had that introductory website, and I was honestly scared to death of WordPress. I'm not scared to death of it anymore, but it is a lot of maintenance. So I was very lucky again to fall into Stephen's lap, and I hugged him really tightly, and he let me use his gonnageek.com website to have at my shows.
That's a Canadian thing.
Absolutely.
It's actually a requirement for coming onto the network. That's a requirement.
So I do leverage Stephen's ability to control a website, which is great. If you're doing it by yourself, if you want to minimize the pain that goes into the back end, you go with somebody, like, if you can be part of a network, go be part of a network, but you have to be careful about that too. Might talk about that later, or use, like Stephen said, the podcast host provided website as well. And like you said, that can get expensive over time, the more shows that you have. So what we usually do, Stephen actually turned me on to this, is if you are considering web hosting, go to webhostingtalk.com, the forums over there, Stephen?
Yes.
Yeah, webhostingtalk.com. And then you can find what are reliable hosts, what hosts can actually get or enable you to host your podcast there, and so on and so forth. So all of that information, by the way, can be found at betterpodcasting.com, episode 65. So that's betterpodcasting.com/65.
Well, I'll even add on to that. I do a lot of web design for clients and stuff like that. And I was never a big fan of WordPress.com until recently. They started allowing their business class users the ability to install their own themes and install their own plugins.
Right.
So if anybody's interested in doing something like that, and I do not have an affiliate link for this at all, although I should, $25 a month gets you business class WordPress.com. You can install anything you want. You can build anything you want. My last 3 clients have been on that. I don't have to worry about hosting, support. I mean, anything. It's been amazing. And even if you put Libsyn on top of that for $15 or whatever their minimal plan is, it's not expensive these days to create your own brand.
Yeah. One thing that I do like to point out, though, is that when people are starting out, they often underestimate how much time that does take to maintain a website, which is why for someone like a teacher who's starting a site, I think really your best bet is just to start with your media provider's basic service, just because it's so much less steps. It's so much more straightforward. And generally, if you pick a reputable provider like Podbean or Libsyn, you end up finding that it just works. You know, you're not running into outages because they limit what you can do. So it's harder for you to break it. From a podcast hosting perspective, while we actually host better podcasting on Libsyn, I will say that one of our members over on the Gonna Geek Network, Chris Farrell, he is VP over there. He uses Podbean and he's used them for a very, very long time. And he's had really good success. Back in the early days, they got a bit of a bad name because they had some back-end server problems. But then for the last few years, they've been fairly solid overall. And they're a good bang for the buck. They're a little bit better in price-wise than Libsyn, but Podbean and Libsyn are definitely the two that I recommend the most.
And if you are a teacher out there and you're looking, you know, again, we're talking back and forth between classroom and you know, real podcasting kind of. I shouldn't have said real podcasting, but you know what I mean out there. I mean, I'm a big believer in, look, if you're just playing with audio and video, get a Google site, right? Like get a Weebly, get an EduBlogs, get a something like that that's out there. But, you know, I do a lot of work even in my own school district. Grab a nice video file, make a screencast using Screencastify or Screencast-O-Matic or whatever you want to use out there, and just put stuff onto your Google site. I mean, if iTunes is not for you because you're just creating instructional videos, fast forward a few minutes on this show until we get to the good stuff here. The question that I have to ask you guys, and this is a question that comes to me a lot of my workshops, why can't I, and again, I'm going to bring this up, I'm a 4th grade teacher. Why can't I just put my audio in Dropbox or in Google Drive, or because you can, right? Like if you're only downloading 1 or 2 episodes and you're doing it for grandma, you can put your audio in Dropbox. Using the PowerPress plugin, you can get your feed started. And I know my answer. I want to get your answer for that, because really you can do that. It's not really if you should or shouldn't, but what's your answer to that stuff? Talking to a teacher here.
Well, if I was talking to a teacher, I would say, what are your expectations? Because if your expectations are you're only going to get 20 to 50 downloads, you know, parents or grandma or something like that, then you could do really anything. But if you want to have a long-term sustained show that's out there for the public consumption worldwide, because podcasts are worldwide, then I would go ahead and I would get on a media host or host your own show through a dedicated website. A great way to do this that makes it available to everybody is through YouTube, right? So you use some sort of audio video editor, like if you're on the Mac OS system, you're talking about iMovie or Final Cut. If you're on the Windows versions, we are really partial to Movie Studio between Stephen and I. Movie Studio 15 Platinum, I believe we were both on. And that is a good way to just put either a static picture or many pictures behind your audio, upload that to YouTube and make it available on YouTube. The one caveat I would say about making it available on YouTube is you have to make sure there's no copyrighted material on there. Otherwise, you might get a strike against your channel. So if you're playing the average radio songs on as background or as your intro outro, you're going to get hit with that. So that was the one caution of putting stuff on YouTube.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get into doing a co-host, because I'll save the story, but we've had situations here where our co-host decides to play some music in the background, and well, that's a strike against your channel sometimes with all that.
Yeah,
but I know you've got I'm looking in the show notes here. You must have a good co-host story here, Stargate. So
yes, I do.
Graphics. Right. I was talking about this yesterday at the workshop. I fell in love with Canva because I think it's easy. It's wonderful. It's actually one of the things that I actually pay for because of all the volume and stuff that I do. But as a teacher, there was a great video that came out this week, in fact, from Jamie Keats over at Teachers Tech on making your graphics using Google Slides or Google Drawings. And that's certainly another option to go. What's your thoughts on graphics, and what do you guys use?
Okay, so I will admit that I build all mine generally from scratch, right? It's something that I tinkered with graphics design for a while. So that's something that I do a long way. Now, with that said, there's a lot of people who I know that sometimes teachers don't have access to things like the Adobe Creative Suite and whatnot. There's a piece of software that I discovered last year that does a large amount of what Adobe Photoshop does. So if you've got a little bit of experience in that but you just can't afford the Adobe Photoshop model. Affinity Photo, AFFINITY Photo. I converted over to that last year, and yes, there are some features in there because it's still, generally speaking, relatively new that Photoshop have that Affinity Photo doesn't. But I've been using it as a Photoshop substitute for about a year now, and it's done everything that I've needed to do with a couple of occasional frustrations. But overall, it's a really powerful piece of software, and it's a lot more affordable than the Adobe suite.
I will check that out. I was thinking you were going to say another one of my favorites, which is Pixelmator. I use that on the Mac. That's $50, something like that. But I used that one for years before I got into Canva. SP, what do you use?
I use Stephen or I use PowerPoint.
You use PowerPoint. Tell me about this, because I work with a company that also uses PowerPoint a lot. And
so you can build, it's very difficult and I wouldn't recommend it, but you can build reasonable graphics in PowerPoint if you're just doing simple stuff. You can't do anything immensely. As a matter of fact, I just took a drone photo class that said, man, maybe you should be using what is Adobe Lights, something. Lightroom. And I did get to play around with that a little bit, but this is something that honestly, as a podcaster, if you're going to do it for a while, you should be comfortable either hiring somebody that is very competent and timely to do your graphics for you, or you should start to learn how to do it yourself and maybe go through some YouTube videos or take a class or two on it and really get comfortable with it, because you will need new graphics all the time for your shows. It's the header on different sites. Like if you have social media accounts, you're going to need different sizes and different shapes in different places. If you change up your podcast art per episode, which is something you can do, that is going to require going in and getting some photos or going ahead and creating the graphics yourself. So it is a part of podcasting, and that goes back to the website stuff, right? If you're not comfortable with it, make sure that you have a way to get it done. And my recommendation would not to go into Fiverr and to use Fiverr as a source, because you never know what sort of copyrighted material they're giving you. You never know if you can go back to them to get the work done again for another site. So if you're going to pay somebody, swap it out with your friend that's a graphic artist, or actually go and pay for it, because it is a big deal with podcasts. It's part of the branding and marketing for it. And if you're just a teacher, well, I mean, odds are you might have a student that could do some work for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings up a topic I really wanted to hit on here, which is paying for services. Now, obviously, if you're doing a website and somebody's doing your website, there's an expectation it's going to take a couple weeks for things. But if you record an episode, say tonight, and I have to then, what is the process? You call Stephen and say, I just did a show. This is the topic. Can you make me a graphic? And then you say, how long does it take for you to make the graphic? And is there a 24-hour turnaround? I'm just one of those guys that I need to have the graphic yesterday. I don't have time to wait. Why am I outsourcing or paying for? What is your experience with asking Stephen or somebody else, I would say, to do your graphics? I mean, what do you give them? What's the expectation? Do you give them pictures and say, make it look nice? Like, what is your process here?
Sometimes the timeline is years. And that's fair. That's really what I try to do, is I try to minimize what I'm doing and try to get stuff that's applicable to multiple different sources and things. I don't change my artwork per every episode. You don't have to do that. But getting the source PNGs is always great. Like if you really do have a graphic artist to go in and do stuff, if you're paying for it, make sure that you pay the premium to get the original layered files and
PSDs, the Photoshop files, PSDs.
PSDs. Or if you have a friend do it, make sure that they give you all those files versus just the JPEG, because you're going to need it down the road. Podcast standards change all the time. In the time period that I've been podcasting, the podcast art on iTunes has gone from, I believe, 140 up to 3,000 pixels. So there is a difference in what is acceptable for standards. And if you don't meet those standards, sometimes your podcast can get booted from those particular destinations. And if you are distributing your podcast to the main sites like iTunes or Apple Podcasts, Apple, that's really what we're supposed to call it now. then you would have to need to stay within their standards, which increase all the time because technology increases all the time.
That's one of those things when I'm working with larger clients, I'm asking them for a 6,000 by 6,000 graphic because at least I'll have it on file. You never know when they're going to change things, or at a super high mega resolution retina display. You never know with those different things. Topic came up yesterday. When you're recording audio, video, personally, no matter if I'm exporting audio only or if I'm exporting audio and video, much like we're doing right now, I record video. If something happens, I can wave at the camera. It's an edit point. I also edit all my stuff in Final Cut Pro, so I can see where the mistakes are. I can see where these different things are, as opposed to being in an Audacity or something like that, which is audio only, where if you've just got a big, huge audio file, you don't really know where those mistakes are until you kind of go back. What are your thoughts on this? Because I know you do a lot of video. Right?
I do. I love video. Video was my passion before podcasting. That's actually how I got into podcasting, was I was trying to fill that video passion. And it was sort of similar. But I'm a big advocate for someone starting out to go audio only for a couple main reasons. Number one, it's a lot easier. It's a lot more straightforward. You need less strong equipment, so less resources are needed to edit audio than video. It's faster, generally speaking, to export audio than it is video, and it's just a layer that's removed. So people starting out, I think the audio is a lot easier. The second reason why is because I'm also a big advocate for hardware recorders for your audio source. And the reason why I say that is because they eliminate the problem that comes with just recording on your computer. And generally, if you're doing video, you are recording on your computer. So if your computer shuts down or restarts, or Windows decides that it's going to do an app update partway, it might cause problems as opposed to using a hardware physical device, which is just completely isolated. And so it's a lot easier to start out just with a hardware recorder recording your microphone. So generally, I recommend people start with audio. With that said, I do love video, but I started out doing audio only podcasts.
Interesting. What do you think, SP?
There's a couple of reasons that I tend towards audio in my shows right now versus video, even though we actually do both on all my shows right now. It's because the downloads or the consumption on audio far, far exceeds the video consumption of what I do. That is not the case for everybody. A lot of people have YouTube channels and podcasts, and their YouTube channels videos do much, much better than the audio version of the podcast. But consider this. There are many more opportunities for an individual to consume an audio podcast if it's not visually enabled, like you're giving a screen tutorial or something like that. Yeah. People can listen to this show in the gym. They can listen to it when they're out on a run. They can listen to it while they're mowing the lawn. They can listen to it when they're driving across the country or on a plane. There are a lot of opportunities to listen to audio versus actually watch video, especially as you get older. Now, students, they have their screens with them all the time, but if you're at work at your desk, you're not necessarily going to be able to watch video all the time. So audio is king as far as my content goes for consumption, and I tend to lean that way. So we do have the big broadcast microphones in front of us, or at least good dynamic cardio microphones in front of our co-host as we record, because we want to get that good audio out. And then video, it's kind of a nicety. Stephen loves it and does some phenomenal production on Guinea Geek and Better Podcasting. We actually discussed for him to do production on a couple other shows, and he just didn't have the not the bandwidth, but the data on his plan to have that much video coming back and forth all the time for him. So
plus, then I'd have to get that spousal sign off too, right?
Yeah, I can pay her off. It's no big deal. So yeah, audio is much easier, as Stephen alluded to, with the equipment, with the cost, and the consumption there's more opportunities for it. Now, if you're doing, like I said, a visually astute show, maybe a YouTube channel would be better for you. But most of the stuff that we do, audio is king.
There's one other thing that I'd like to just quickly throw in there as well, is the fact that audio is more forgivable in editing. And what I mean by that is, if I'm doing a video show and I go and I say, and I do that, I can go and I can edit that out. I can edit that out quite seamlessly because I said the same thing twice, as opposed to a video where I'd either have to have a second shot that I can switch to or just accept that it's going to be choppy. So audio is much more forgivable to edit.
And I love that you said that. And for that reason, I will always endorse and love using Wirecast. Even right now, you guys are only seeing me, but every time I go to scratch my nose or put my head up, what you guys aren't seeing as I'm switching the camera angle, so it's only on you and not on me. And
Perfect.
It's exactly what you just said. Like, and that's how, like, I can sit here and do an hour-long show and edit it in 10 minutes. Like the game that I play here is, can I actually have the whole show edited in Final Cut before I say goodbye to my guest? Because I'm right, because you're editing it on the fly. I mean, all these different things that you're working on here. But as you guys mentioned, for new podcasters, stick to audio, right? Like, just stick to audio, keep it simple, use exactly what you're looking for. Budget wise, and let's talk about this from both the classroom teacher and from the let's build your own kind of stuff. Classroom teacher, we talked about, get a snowball mic, use the iPhone, pad, Chromebook, whatever you're using. You can even go free on this. The thing that I always recommend is a Chrome extension called Simple Audio Recorder. Or if you're listening to this particular show next year and you're on an Apple, they just announced that the Voice Memos app is now going to be iCloud based. So why not use the Voice Memos app to Notice they didn't. Okay, I'll stop here, but they didn't say that. I was waiting for them to say, now you can make a podcast on your phone and it shows up. Apple. Anyway, but you don't need to. I'm waiting for the geek stuff by the end, guys. But you don't need to spend money to do quality audio recording, right? Your earbuds, a Chromebook, free Chrome extension, you're done.
Well, there's a difference between quality audio and listenable audio. So all you really need is listenable audio. If you're going for quality audio, you do need some gear for that. But if you're doing a podcast with your kids at whatever age that they are, all you need is listenable, and that's fine. And you're right. Do the earbuds or whatever. By the way, the FaceTime, I guess, is now up to 32 people. So you could have a whole classroom on FaceTime if everybody had an iOS device. So that's something that could be done in the future. I don't know if there's a record capability with that or not, but and it won't be multi-track, so you couldn't take people out. So, I mean, that's a whole complexity in thing. But if you're just doing something for fun in the classroom, you're trying to get the kids to remember something, then just get it listenable, and that's all you need.
While we're talking about the budget, one of the easiest ways that you can kind of skirt the budget if you are having multiple people connect from different locations is to use Google Hangouts on Air. Because Google Hangouts on Air, everybody just gets a link that they just connect to on their computer, and then whatever they've got hooked up, if they've got a webcam mic, if they've got a better mic, then Hangouts on Air will automatically record that. Now, that's a video, but there's tools that are free out there that you can convert that over to audio. So absolutely, that's just a simple way to skirt that budget.
There's a lot of easy ways to skirt that budget. The one thing that you can't skirt, however, is something that you guys actually added to the show notes: integrity. Who added that one?
Yeah, that was me. It was something that I brought up in our 50th episode, which was my golden rules of hobby podcasting. And that was one that I could not leave out. I needed to have it in there. So as you're podcasting, make sure that you maintain your integrity. It doesn't really cost you anything, but make sure that you're not selling out. Make sure that you're not messing with your audience. You're treating your audience with fairness, and you're treating their time with fairness. That's a big thing, right? Make sure you're not wasting your audience's time, whoever that audience is, whether it's the family, mom and pop and grandma and grandpa, or whether that's the worldwide audience. You have to be conscious of their time. If you have 100 downloads to your show and you have an hour-long show, if you cut out 1 minute, you're saving 100 minutes worldwide. You know, that's a big deal, right? It does add up. And I get that from different TV producers that actually show their show to millions of people. And they say, well, if I screw up an episode, I have just wasted like 5 million hours of human life. You know, that's something that you don't want to do. So be conscious of that. And then just make sure that you can look yourself in the mirror after you're done with an episode and that you've released it and that you can go on into the future. You don't want to cut your podcasting career short just because you've lied to somebody along the way, or you've mistreated a guest along the way, or you've misrepresented what you're doing along the way.
That is some really good advice on that. And you know, you don't think about it that way sometimes. And you know, even you guys before we started the show asked, well, how long is this going to be? And my answer is, we'll just go until the conversation kind of goes, right? And it's better than saying to a guest, it's an hour show, and you realize 10 minutes into the episode, your guest is not Mr. or Mrs. Personality. And if you cut it down to a 15-minute show, but you told them it was an hour, now you've got this, well, why did we stop early? There's a lot of things in there. That's interesting. I will definitely put that in there. Do you have any thoughts? And I'm asking this for my co-host. Do you have any thoughts on using puppets in podcasting?
Puppets in podcasting. Yeah, if it's an audio show, audio only, why would you use puppets?
Because okay, so I have to have you guys come back sometime when I have Sam on and his gaggle of puppets. We do a show where our people out there listening know our good friend Dr. Sam Patterson. He has the Edu puppets, and he's got a wild bunch, and sometimes we have them on and sometimes we don't. But yeah, good conversations about that stuff. Now, you had mentioned your audience. Again, questions that I got asked yesterday. When should I start obsessing about my download statistics or my views, or, you know, I just started a podcast. Which analytics app should I use?
Before we get into the really geeky stuff on stats, we've mentioned it several times, so I just want to comment on it. You said you were doing a seminar or a conference or a classroom session on podcasting. I've actually had the opportunity to do that multiple times over the last few years, and it's amazing once you get into a room with a bunch of people that are interested in podcasting from a variety of different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
It's great, the conversation that goes back and forth, and the need to learn about this mystical art of podcasting really comes through with that. So it's really great. If you, listener, watcher to this video, to this audio, want to know more about podcasting, you know, find a conference in your area in something that you're interested in. Odds are they will have some sort of podcasting track or session. Make sure that you make it to that. And then you connect with different people in your area that are interested in podcasting. So just, that's a little side note that I am really passionate about. Matter of fact, Stephen just released a video of us at Gen Con last year on our YouTube channel. We finally got around to releasing that. So we do tape them and put them out.
About earlier. So.
Did you say Gem Con? Are you doing a conference on Gem the cartoon?
No, Gen Con. That's the annual gaming convention in Indianapolis.
Got it.
And it was a big one. It was the 50th last year. So we were fortunate enough to get a couple of panels there. Yeah. Okay. Now back to your original question of downloads and statistics. Well, that's an interesting one, because if you're really interested in counting them, I mean, if you're really interested in finding out how many people are listening, you got to go with somebody that's IAB, got podcast download guidelines 2.0 algorithm compliance, but there's nobody's actually been certified for compliance yet. But
so you talked to Mike.
I've talked to a lot of people. Yeah.
Oh.
I agree. I think that when you're looking at stats, it's important to look right now more than ever. You should be looking and asking somebody who you're hosting with whether or not they are IAB compliant or gearing towards that, because that's essentially the certification that the industry is adopting for statistics. And the reason why it's important is because it's going to give you the most accurate to the current specification as you can get. If you go with somebody else who counts double downloads and things like that, then you're kind of giving yourself false information. Now, I actually say don't pour over your stats. Look at the trends. Look at the bigger picture. So you should be looking, how is this episode comparing to last week? How is it looking in the overall picture? Don't go there and say, oh, I got only one download today. You should just be looking if you're moving the needle at all, because if you're sitting there counting individual downloads, I think that that's where you start stressing unnecessarily, because for all you know, maybe you released an episode and forgot that it's a major holiday somewhere else in the world, and that's why your listeners are down, because everybody else has that day off and they're out hanging out with their kids or something like that. So don't look per like count the individual beans, look at the big picture.
So I would actually count it if you're doing it for fun, if you're doing it for a hobby, if this is your passion, I would say whatever your goal is going into the podcast, you should be achieving that somehow. That actually should be your metric. But for the large majority of people that actually release a podcast, what you're really craving for is some sort of feedback or community involvement.
Yes.
So I would gauge it on how much feedback I've received, what's the action on my social media accounts, how many emails or voicemails have my podcast received, how many comments on YouTube, that sort of thing is how I would gauge how my podcast would be doing or my show would be doing over time. But if you're just simply doing it for fun, like you're releasing it for your classroom, like the majority of people I think that are listening to this, is just make sure it's a good quality product that people can listen to or watch and get something out of, and then not waste time in their day. And I think that's really what you should be striving for. Now, if you want to monetize, if you're going in to try to sell a service or something like that, then you need to worry about the statistics.
You know, I always go back to, I don't know who was the original one for this, but I always credit it to Dave Jackson, which is, if you're doing a niche, if you're doing the Left-Handed Smoke Shifters podcast, and you have 8 downloads, but you know that worldwide there's only 10 people who are certified in left-handed smoke shifters, then you've got 80% of the population listening to your show.
Absolutely.
I'll take that any day, right? So I'll take those 8 out of 10 any day.
And while we're talking about sort of honing in on your niche, one thing that I think a lot of people who get into podcasting, where they go wrong, is they get into podcasting. And what I mean by that is they're like, I want to grow my audience, so I'm going to attend all of these podcasting conventions. Well, that's not your audience. That's great if you want to connect with other podcasters and you want to get to know sort of what other people that are making podcasts are doing. If I go and I want to grow my audience, I should instead be attending and spending my time somewhere that surrounds my topic. Like if I'm a gaming podcast, I should be going to that Gen Con instead of going to a different podcast. Oh, I can't remember the name. Podcast movement, because my podcast, I'm going to have a better chance of connecting with potential listeners at a gaming convention. And the way that I always relate this to people is like, let's say that all of a sudden you go, I want to start doing some woodworking, and maybe I want to go and build a deck. But wait, I know nothing about tools. I'm going to go and check out some form of information on different tool use to learn how to use the tools. That's not going to teach me how to build that deck. That's just going to teach me how to use tools, which is what podcasting conventions are, is they're helping you with the actual podcast process. They're not helping you grow your specific audience.
That's actually a really good analogy about all that stuff, because I find that a lot of people who want to learn more about podcasting do go to the podcast conventions, podcast movement, all those different things.
Yeah,
Podfest is another one. We have one called MapCon here, which our good friend Joe Pardo does. But finding out where to actually go, I mean, I find sometimes I learn more about podcasting by going to the educational stuff, because that is my audience. What do you like? What do you listen to? Even yesterday, I started off by saying, why are you here? There's 200 people at this conference. 6 people showed up for my session. My first question is, why this one? What do you find interesting? And you find out that people just want to know about this. I mean, I had somebody who was in this session who was doing her doctorate on digital media in the classroom, and she wanted me to spew a ton of statistics about podcasting. Now, unfortunately, today is when TechCrunch put out all the podcasting numbers, but like, people are curious about all of that stuff. And yeah, I totally, go where your audience is, right? Like, because the people at Podcast Movement are not going to subscribe to your show. Maybe they will, but you want to go to that left-handed smoke shifter conference and get those people to sign up for your show and get you guys to know where it is. So, switching topics here to the one that I kind of see where you have here, and I don't know who wrote this, but I definitely want to have whoever said it give the answer. We are about 180 episodes into one of our shows called the Tech Educators Show. It's a roundtable show. We've got 5 co-hosts. We've been doing it for 6 or 7 years. What are your thoughts on working with co-hosts? How do you find a good co-host? How do you keep a good co-host? How do you delegate a good co-host? And this is my personal question, how do you make sure that both you and your co-host are equally as invested into the show as should be?
I love podcasting with co-hosts. Like it way better than trying to do a solo show. You've got somebody to bounce off of. You could not only on the podcast recording, but also with the creative process. You know, trying to do a solo podcast about podcasting would be very tough. With better podcasting, SP and I are able to throw that ball back and forth all the time with developing topic ideas, with developing show notes, and going through the whole process. So co-hosts offer a big relief. Now, finding a co-host can be tough. With something like Better Podcasting, we were fortunate enough. SP and I met each other through the Gonna Geek Network. He came into the Gonna Geek Network, and then I was talking with him a lot. We quickly found our similar passions, and we both discovered that we wanted to do a podcast about podcasting. I think technically I pitched it first, but we were both planning on trying to do that. And so
Yeah,
we just naturally were able to connect on this, and it took us about 11 months to get it all developed and everything. But that's how we found each other, was just through a relationship that was already existing. Now, on the flip side, I used to do a comic book podcast called The Fanboy Buzz, and that was a different situation. We actually had a couple hosts exit at one point, and we knew that we wanted to keep going and fill those seats. So what we did was we just started to bring guests on and sort of put an open call. Hey, are you interested? And we brought people in, and we cycled them in each episode as a guest. And then some people we thought, okay, that really worked really well. And we brought them back, and we did that again. And eventually we kind of got the sense of some people that would mesh really well. And so we brought them on, and that's when we ended up bringing them on permanently. Now, I know that guesting process, SP's had a bit of experience with that on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., right?
Yeah, first of all, I took over Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. coming at it from a guesting perspective. The original people that started the podcast were just going to end it. And I was like, don't end it. I'll take it over. So I ended up getting the keys to the kingdom with that. But then I had to have some hosts that were coming on board. And I was talking to several people about starting a podcast at that time about the sci-fi show, or at least it was on sci-fi in the United States, Continuum. So I had a couple of people that I was already talking to. Turns out that a couple of them were really big Marvel fans to begin with. So I'm like, okay, come on board. So over time, though, we've had a little bit of a host flip over. And whenever that occurs, we've looked at the people that have come on and they have been guests on the show. And we really find out who's been really good to work with and fits into the overall aspect of our personalities of the show, that sort of thing. And we've been able to do that. It has also been the case over on Starling Tribune as well. I did see, if you're looking for a co-host out of nowhere, I have seen recently casting calls over on the Reddit subreddits that are podcasting related. So podcasting subreddit, podcast subreddit. There's actually been casting calls largely lately, just in the last couple of weeks. It's been, we want a female or an all female podcast. So they're putting the call out there for that, which I think is great, by the way. The one caveat that I will say about that, we actually, and I won't say the name of the podcast, but we know of a podcast that's on the network, and they came together through one of those forum casting calls years and years ago. And that relationship fell out over time because one party wasn't as committed as the others. So before I get into, I'll just jump right into it. So if you plan to monetize at any point in time, make sure you get some sort of agreement down in writing. An email. It doesn't necessarily have to be a contract, but an email which says who's going to be responsible for paying what and who's going to be responsible for what activities, and then what is the distribution of the funding going to be. That's kind of important because I've seen podcasts break up over that over time. But if you are just looking at it for some buddies getting together for a passion, make sure you understand who's really going to be responsible for what. Because if you do a live video show like I do on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. or Starling Tribune, there's a lot of facets that goes into that. There's a lot of research that needs to be done on the specific topic. There's show notes that need to be written. As you well know, since you do live podcasts, there's a lot to get ready just to stream a live video podcast, let alone record it and then edit it afterwards. And then there's a whole promotion aspect, the interfacing with social media. So there's different jobs that you can give different co-hosts. And I'm like Stephen, I love podcasting with co-hosts. I've flirted with doing a solo show, and it's just not the same. You can't keep it going as well as you can with co-hosts. With equally motivated co-hosts. That's what you really need to get to. And sometimes you have to go through some turnover before you finally get to some co-hosts that you can work with long-term.
Any good stories about working with Stephen?
I fired him twice.
Yeah, twice.
And that is true. It's a true story.
Well,
Seriously.
no, it's a joke, but we'll go with yes. We'll go with yes. We've been fortunate enough that we haven't had to do that. But if you find the right host, a lot of times I found that there's a natural end for those people who aren't as engaged. Like they'll end up at one point just saying, yeah, you know what, it's just not for me, or I've got other things I want to do. And they withdraw themselves, which is a lot easier. And I've had that happen quite a bit over the years. In fact, I actually had SP came onto the GonnaGeek.com show. He wasn't there from the beginning. We had somebody else who wanted to start doing some other podcasts. And so they had to step back. They had some personal stuff going on as well. And that was SP had been a guest. And so he was able to come in. So unfortunately, we can't always have that. That's not something that we all get lucky enough to have that situation. So I agree with SP. If you are getting into anything, you should have some form of writing.
Now, you've been saying something over the last little bit here, and I want to make sure people understand how this whole thing works. If you go to gonnageek.com/about, you guys have some guidelines for anybody who's interested in submitting a podcast to you guys. How does that process work, and what kind of shows are you looking for?
We look for the highest bid, so dollar figure wise, people should bribe us.
Good.
Yeah, no. What it is actually because the GonnaGeek.com network we're all hobbyists, so we all do it for the love of podcasting. So we actually have a panel of people who, yes, I've picked them based off of their experience and sort of the feedback that they've given, and they will be part of the review process. So somebody goes to GonnaGeek.com/about or GonnaGeek.com/join, it doesn't matter, and they submit their information for their podcast. And then we actually take a look at it, and there's certain members from that review panel that will review it and give feedback. The ultimate decision does come to me as the owner of GonnaGeek.com, but I value that feedback so much. It's everybody is always right on point, and we look and make a decision whether we think it would fit with the network or not. And sometimes we've actually had one or two quality podcasts which have applied, but we just thought it's not the right fit for everything else on the network. And so we've had to reject them. Yes, we've had our fair share of things that we've also thought is not the greatest podcast. And so we've rejected off of that. But we take a look at every applicant that comes in because we want to grow the network to be the best it can be. We don't want to just go and accept everybody willy-nilly.
Guys, first of all, I want to say thank you. We've gone through a ton of topics here as far as how to create, how to write, how to publish, how to promote, how to do all these things. You got a few more minutes here that we can kind of geek out on a few topics?
Yeah, absolutely.
I got to ask, because we did this a little early before we hit the record button here, but today was a great day for the geek, for the nerd, for the film buff. Today was the day we saw the first glimpse of a Michael Bay free Transformers trailer. Have you seen the Bumblebee trailer?
I have.
What do you think?
Yep.
It looks like it's promising. I got to say, it looks fun, which is nice. The Michael Bay Transformers, there was always this serious nature right within the trailers, and this looks like it's going to be fun, and that's what I want.
It also looks like you can see the action without having a flip cut like half a second into something, so you don't actually know what's going on with the action.
See, I always brought my camcorder into the theater and then played it back later on like 0.5 speed so I could actually see what was going on because it was just all blur, right?
So the FCC will be to your house pretty soon, and they're going to confiscate all your podcasting gear because of that.
Does the FCC rule in Canada?
No, it doesn't.
There's a reciprocating agreement. Go ahead.
that would be FCC.ca. Is that how that works?
Yeah, something like that. I don't know what that site is. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to endorse that site.
No. I'll ask another question that popped up the other day. In a cage match, Thanos or Darth Vader?
Thanos, 10 out of 10.
Snap over the lightsaber.
Well, even without the snap, right? We saw how violent Thanos was, right? Thanos, there's no chance Darth Vader's going to win that one.
I would say even the Hulk could take Darth Vader.
The problem with Darth Vader is he's basically cyborg, so you just got to get somebody strong to rip off his arms, and he's done.
But he's got force choke. But he's got.
Can he do that without an arm, though?
Oh, can you do that without an arm?
I don't know.
Yoda did.
That's a good question. I still say that he's dead before it ever happens. I think Thanos is winning. especially with the snap factor.
All right. Well, so while we're on the topic, what'd you think about it? Avengers of Infinity War. I assume you guys have discussed it on the show. So talk to us a little bit about your Marvel universe here.
So fun fact, on the GuineaGeek.com show, we actually generally stay away from the big movies because we have so many other network members that do that it seems a little redundant for us to go and talk about it on the flagship show. So we let everybody else have that. But I thought it was a good movie myself overall. I think that there's a lot of things that I will like better when the second part is out. But it met the expectations that I had, which was the first of a 2-part movie.
Yeah.
So I didn't expect everything to be wrapped up. There was a couple of problems that I had with it, but overall I enjoyed it.
What were some of the problems?
I thought that there was a bit of a pacing misalignment in a couple of spots where it just all of a sudden took a very different tone. So I thought that the pacing was not as fluid as I would have liked.
Okay. SP, what do you think?
SP's got lots to say on it, by the way.
Yeah, I hear it.
I mean, we had a whole 2-hour podcast on it on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. episode number 241, but I as far as a movie, it was decent. My issue was because I'm so ingrained in the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe, hashtag it's all connected. By the way, go to hashtag it's all connected.com. You get a special treat if you spell out the word hashtag. So I have had an issue because after the movie came out, I was like, how are they going to do the next year? Because you had all sorts of Netflix Marvel series coming out at the time that the movie came out. You didn't know if Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was going to get renewed or not. It did, but they skirted the whole issue by going into the summer of 2019 versus going through the regular season next year. And I think that what is going on wasn't extremely well planned throughout the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. And that's what my major issue was. Matter of fact, I went into Deadpool 2 and I immensely enjoyed that. I laughed my butt off during that. And it was much more of an enjoyable movie for me than Avengers Infinity War. Is my opinion golden? Is my opinion the one and only opinion? Is my opinion right? No, but it's right for me. So that's what makes talking about movies great, because you'll like something more than somebody else and you can get their joy out of a certain thing. So I did hear a lot about how people enjoyed the Avengers Infinity War. Largely it was for people that were steeped in the comics from the Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity Wars, stuff like that. They just love seeing the on the screen. They love seeing the universe building. They love seeing all the characters interact with each other. And quite frankly, it was well written and there was a lot of great acting in it, which I would assume with all the great actors in there. So yeah, but is it my favorite Marvel movie ever? No, it is not by far. I came out of it with a sour note in my mouth, sour taste in my mouth. I don't think I'll be watching it again. That's just me though.
So with Disney moving towards clearly this female hero kind of thing going on here that's been going on for the last little bit, are we going to see Avengers 4 featuring Captain Marvel,
yes,
Wasp, and Pepper Potts?
I'm trying to remember. So the Russo brothers came out and they said who had died and who didn't. I think Pepper Potts was gone. I think they came out and said that, but don't quote me on that. They did come out and say of the people that you did not see on the screen on the end, they said who was gone and who was not after the snap. And so go refer back to those articles.
But I mean, come on, like Spider-Man did not die.
No, and that was my problem with it. It's like, of course, there's no meaning to this because of course it's going to go away. And that was another issue I had with it.
That was the other issue that I had, and was that they had it written to almost make you feel emotion about these deaths. But the way that I say it is that I don't understand people who felt emotion about the deaths. I understand the emotion about the events surrounding the deaths, but the fact that people actually were emotional about individual deaths, I can't get it. I can't get on board with that, because it's like we literally see in this movie that anybody can be brought back. You saw that with Vision. You saw that anything can be undone. So there's all sorts of people that subscribe to the theory that Loki's permanently dead. Vision spelled out that anybody can be brought back because that was pre-snap. So I think that absolutely at this point here, you can't care at all about any deaths, but the events, the writing surrounding the deaths was really good. But I didn't think that the actual the way that they're trying to make people feel emotion about death, to me, that was nonsense.
Yeah. Spider-Man's Doctor Who moment. I don't want to go with Iron Man. That was well done. I mean, I would say it in joke, but it was really well done. So I did appreciate that scene.
In a cage match, Optimus Prime or He-Man?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I'm a Transformers fan, so I'll go with Optimus Prime. Although, he ends up dying and becoming Rodimus. So yeah, I don't know.
So do we get Shiva with He-Man?
Hey, look, if you want her.
I think he does.
She's coming to Netflix.
Okay, because I think the two of them together will win. So there you go.
Okay, so you have the Princess of Power and the most powerful man in the universe against Optimus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Optimus has the hugest heart, though. I mean, yeah, how can you go against that?
Sorry, I said Shiva. I meant Shira, by the way. So sorry. My apologies.
So as we go through here, let's just take a look here. Your thoughts on Han Solo? Was it a bust, or was it coming down from the last Star Wars movie, or is Disney just jamming this thing right in front of everybody and way too much Star Wars these days?
I'll give my opinion here first, because I mentioned that I have a family. I have not had a chance to see it yet, so
you know the ending.
I don't. I'm completely surprised by everything that's probably going to happen. No, I've heard a little bit about it. So
you know that Chewbacca gets his hair cut and he's like just this little like.
Oh, I thought the Falcon blew up. Oh wow. I thought the whole thing blew up. The Millennium Falcon.
Well, the turns out that the Kessel Run actually involves Sebulba.
Okay, fair.
SP, save the conversation here.
All right. So you're talking grand strategic things here. First of all, you have it sandwiched in between some amazing movies, everything from Avengers Infinity War through Jurassic World and then back to Ant-Man and the Wasp later on. Disney is ruling the box office and they're kind of hurting themselves a little bit. Also, Han Solo was not the first, but the second non-main series movie that they've done, the one-off, if you will. I think they actually wanted to try to make a little prequel series out of it. But Rogue One, I think people came out of that like, okay, well, I see where this all started. But again, I could care less about Rogue One because it's not really part of the main universe. And you had no characters coming out of that you could care about in the future. And I think people were looking at that Han Solo like, I can watch this later on video. My time is valuable. It happened during Memorial Day weekend, so it was actually nice for most of the country, and people were out enjoying it in the United States. I can't speak for Canada because I think they still had their igloos up. And I think that you have a little bit of crowding. Now, a couple of years ago, we did this great, and I don't remember what episode it was on, but we did a lot of great research into like the amount of movies that are out now at the time, I think it was 2016 versus like 1985. And it is amazing. Like there were 80 movies in 1985. There's like 1,200 in 2018. So I think you're getting the diversity in choice. This is happening with TV ratings as well, where you have TV, like what used to be a great rating on TV was like 12 to 20 million. Now, if you get like 5 to 7 million in your key demographic or your overall views, that is good now versus where it was before. And you have so many streaming opportunities, like Lost in Space is on Netflix. The Expanse is coming to Netflix. You have Star Trek on CBS All Access, which I'll never see because of that. So there's just this diversity of availability of content out there, and you have to pick and choose, and people aren't choosing everything all the time.
Well, it's time to make another decision here. Cage match, Doctor Strange or Gandalf? Two wizards.
Gandalf the Gray or Gandalf the White? We have to make a distinction.
I'm going to go with this guy right here. This would be Gandalf the Gray.
Well, Gandalf the Gray is probably hopped up on his weed, so I'll give the mental edge to Doctor Strange.
You know, I gotta say that just what we saw in Doctor Strange, the movie, the end, the way that he ended up winning, I think Doctor Strange, unfortunately, has been very undervalued in his power in the Marvel universe. So your gut is to say that Doctor Strange would lose, but if you look at how Doctor Strange won that, I forget, they figured out how many years it was that he went through that cycle. I gotta say Doctor Strange, he's got the stamina.
Okay. I can dig that. Let's do one more just because I'm looking around the room here. We'll go Ragnarok or Unicron.
SP, you take that one.
Wow. I want to say Unicron because Unicron seems to be more powerful to me than Ragnarok, even though Ragnarok was, the big deal, took down Asgard stuff.
Yeah,
But,
they both took them.
Unicron has wreaked more havoc in the universe, I think, than Ragnarok.
Let's go with Unicron because we'll stick with Ragnarok movie version, which we basically didn't see. So we'll go with that.
The website is gonnageek.com. I want to say so thank you to you guys. It's great to meet you. Stephen Jondrew, Stargate Pioneer. Where can we go to find out more information? What do you want us to do? How do we subscribe? How do we reach out to you guys?
Well, go to gonnageek.com for all of the amazing geeky content there. But if you're looking for specifically just podcast related content, please check out betterpodcasting.com. That's the show that SP and I do. We do it on a weekly basis, and that's where we talk about podcasting. So if you're thinking about getting into a podcast, please check out betterpodcasting.com.
Any last words of advice, SP, for anybody out there who is thinking about becoming a podcast or starting a podcast, or maybe they have a co-host that they want to fire?
If they want to fire a co-host, it's very easy. You just say you're fired. But if you are thinking about podcasting, I would make sure it is something that you are passionate about and share that passion with other people. And people are going to listen to you because they're going to see that, they're going to hear that passion coming through your microphone.
I love it, guys. Thank you so much for your time. And I want to say thank you out there for taking a moment to make TeacherCast a part of your professional development network. This is Educational Podcasting Today. You can, of course, sign up for our brand new Facebook group over at educationalpodcasting.tips. I got a couple hundred people in there. It is a great conversation. Check it out today over at educationalpodcasting.tips. And, of course, you can find all the information out over on teachercast.net with what we do. On behalf of everybody here in the TeacherCast Educational Network, my name is Jeff Bradbury, reminding you to keep up the great work in your classrooms and continue sharing your passions with your students.